Do you remember when Q-World was officially released like 4 years ago and everyone was like,
"It's the biggest piece of dog shit"?
well, it just received an update. There was no update. Everyone is still like,
"It's the biggest piece of dog shit."
over the time it didn't get any updates, but it did get mods. People actually made so many mods for this game that it's now, in my opinion, arguably more fun to play long term than the alpha version. It's actually kind of crazy. Let me just quickly go over what the actual objective is in the full release version, then we're gonna go how it's actually different than the alpha version and what I actually think is better. So instead of having like a progressive leveling system that the alpha version has, you now have a leveling system based on how many artifacts you collect, which you collect in dungeons basically. Now each biome has like its own random number of dungeons. It can be like 1 or it can be like 4, but basically these dungeons have artifacts and these artifacts represent which level you are. So if you have 5 artifacts, you're level 5, for example. So this game is now very focused on beating each biome on its own, because you have each biome has its own less difficult and more difficult places that you visit in order to get your character in the best shape possible. Now I want to keep this entire review, or whatever you want to call this video, it's gonna be all based on using the Q-World Mega Mod. Meaning I won't talk about what the base game has and what the mod pack adds, because it's literally like a combination of 2 games. I'll just give you one example. So in the base game, when you leave your biome, all your items get downgraded to the worst rarity, aka to white/gray rarity. With the Mega Mod, now all your items get downgraded for 2 rarities. So if you had a legendary item, it's gonna become blue. If you had a purple one, it's gonna become green, and so on. Now, how is this game really different than the alpha version, and why do people not like it so much? The reason is that Wooly, the developer, completely changed the progression system of the game, which I want to say is not bad on its own, it just might be a bit poorly executed, and a lot of people just preferred the alpha version. Because before, you had this leveling system of gaining XP points by killing enemies and mobs and everything around in the world. You gained XP to level up your character, but here there's no levels for your weapons and equipment, it's only the rarity. And this really makes sense. You just have to think about the whole game as a bunch of like mini games perhaps. Each biome is its own mini game where you have to go from the beginning to the end. And when you finish one biome, you go to another one, and now your gear has been downgraded. It hasn't been turned to shit like it is in the main game, but now with the mods, it's downgraded. So you already have kind of a head start, but you still need to get way better equipment so you can get the artifacts in the new biome. And what the artifacts do is they give you permanent increase to some stats. So you have a biome progression system which resets each biome in a way, and then you have the overall progression which keeps going higher and higher as you play the game, which in theory should work really well. But here's the problem. The problem is that the artifacts bonus that you get once you collect an artifact is very minimalistic in a way. What actually happens is you get like 10% riding speed, 10% hang gliding speed, 0.25 meters light radius. The improvements that you get with the artifacts is unfortunately not very satisfying. That's just the problem. So if you had a different type of boost for the artifacts, I feel like this concept would actually work really, really well. It's okay now, but it could be really good. Though the main combat and equipment wise and everything, it's very similar to what the alpha version was, except, well, now you don't have any XP, so you don't have a skill tree or anything, so you already have already unlocked all the skills, which are a bit different than they used to be. I mainly only played the rogue and the ranger, and the rogue, for example, doesn't have the shuriken spread attack anymore, but it now has an ability where you press R on your keyboard, you instead of attacking with your weapon, you start throwing shurikens for about 20 seconds. You can also hold down shift and attack and you throw a shuriken, but that takes your stamina. So except the skills, the gameplay remains about the same as the alpha version. So what is actually better in this game? First of all, world generation. Before, in the alpha version, all of your landmarks, so to say, were placed on a grid, and you just had to travel in a straight line to find a bunch of different stuff. Here, you already have the whole map explored in a way. You can already see the entire map, but it's really nicely generated, really nicely placed. It's not like on a grid. The game still looks very pretty. There's a lot of new types of buildings, a lot of new types of dungeons, a lot of new types of areas that you can find. The environment is basically way more diverse, which I think is really good. The game actually has like proper quests now. For example, you no longer just go to any landmark and you're like, oh, kill this boss. Now it's very diverse, like you need to kill this witch so the villagers are no longer petrified, or you need to save this gnome, which supplies the city with loot. And when you save him, the city actually sells better loot. Yes, money is actually useful in this game now. Sometimes you have like islands, for example, and you have good guys on the island and they're being attacked and they're like, oh, please help us, you need to destroy these spawners or some weird shit. But it's very diverse what you need to do. Another thing I want to talk about is dungeons. Dungeons have been incredibly improved in this game. Before, you had like pretty much all the dungeons were kinda the same. You had the castle, you had the palace, you had the catacombs and all those, and they all pretty much looked the same. And they all had the same kind of rooms and everything. Okay, yes, palace was a bit nicer looking than a ruins or something. But here, truly every dungeon feels different. It's got like a different interior. Not just the interior, but then you have different rooms. And you have like a lava parkour room. You have like a room with like water areas. You have like a void room, which is actually kind of scary. You have this parkour over this void, which, by the way, you don't want to fall down. If you're low level, you don't want to fall down because you're gonna die. But if you're highly equipped, you're gonna fall down and you won't die because it's not an actual void, it's just a really deep hole and then you can't get out. Dungeons are also very interesting in this game because they go from very easy opponents to super difficult opponents as you go deeper into the dungeon. It's not like in the alpha when you found the entrance of a dungeon and you saw green +1 enemies and you were like, yeah, I don't need to go in here. Here the enemies start at green rarity and then all the way to legendary or to purple. It's sometimes some dungeons are easier and some are a bit harder, but they always scale up to get harder at the end. Dungeons also have secret doors that you can only open if you get specific equipment, which you have to find somewhere in the biome. I'll talk about the equipment in just a second. For example, you have these doors which you need a harp or some shit that you can play and then the door opens and behind it there's a chest with loot. And depending on where in the dungeon you open a secret door, for example, it also depends how good of loot is behind the door. As you progress to the dungeon, sometimes you're gonna fight more bosses than one. And there are gonna be these gates in the dungeon which only open once you defeat all the enemies in a specific room, which is cool because it prevents you from like skipping a boss or just running to the final boss or something. You need to actually beat everything that goes to the final boss. So the equipment or the items that I mentioned before, there's a lot of different items that you can find in the world. You can find this magic harp thing, you can find a flute that you play at a specific spot and some birds come and pick you up and take you to a floating island which has some loot on it. You can find something that I like to call the GPS. And it's basically like a tracker. It tells you if you're near like a secret treasure, it's gonna like point you in the direction you need to go. You also can find like a hang glider, you can find the boat and all the other stuff like the reins you need for riding, climbing shoes as well for so you get infinite climbing stamina. Another thing I wanted to point out in the game is the respawn points. There's these shrines that you go to and you play this flute. This is not a flute that you need to find, by the way, you already have this. And when you play the flute, you set your spawn point. But not only that, a very handy feature is that every shrine that you play the flute at, you can teleport to from anywhere you want. This is really nice because it means that once you explore a certain part of the biome, you can just teleport there anytime instead of having to go across the entire ocean, for example, to get to another part. Another thing that's great in this game, NPCs are actually useful because they still tell some random stuff a lot of the time, but a lot of the time they also tell you, for example, oh, have you seen the captured gnome? He was last seen in the blah blah blah, and they tell you a location where it is, and then on the map it marks it for you as well. When you talk to the NPCs, you can actually find out locations of things in a biome, so it's really fun when you go to a new biome. You go to a city for the first time and you just talk to everyone, and they basically give you a bunch of information. Oh, you find the harp over there, you find the reins over there, you find the witch over there. And there we go. That will be my kind of review of the official QWorld release together with the QWorld Mega Mod. I'm obviously not trying to justify what Wule did here with the game. A game shouldn't need to have a gigantic mod pack for it to work properly, right? But I just feel like maybe a lot of people are missing out on a game that could potentially be fun to them and they just maybe don't realize. So I hope you enjoyed this review, and maybe if you have some time, check out the game with the mod pack.